and welcome to day 2 of our bootcamp. By this point, we have our layout fully set up, and we have just about all of the items connected to their respective activity files. So far, our app doesn't do much more than navigate back and forth between the pages. So in this day, we're going to work on implementing the list functionality itself. Now, when I say list functionality, I essentially mean the recycle view functionality. We'll do this over a few parts, first focusing on building a custom layout to represent an item in a list. So this could be as simple as just adding a text view if you just want the name, or if you want more information or even a picture or something like that, then we'll need to build a more custom approach. Then we're going to work on building up a custom adapter, which will take this new layout into account. And this will basically be a way to bind data to each of these views and populate our list. Then we can actually add some fake items and kind of test things out to see if the list is working properly. Now I'll walk you through almost the entire process, kind of step by step, because this can be pretty confusing if you've never worked with custom list adapters. But let's first get to creating a custom layout. For this one, we actually don't need a separate activity file. We can just go to our layout folder. We're going to right click here, select a new layout resource file, and again, no accompanying activity. So you can choose whatever layout you'd like. I'm just going to pick a constraint layout, and I'm just going to call this something like to do item layout. Okay, source set main, directory layout, again constraint layout. You can select a linear layout or something different if you'd like. Let's click OK, and this will just create a blank layout file for us. Now essentially what we'll want is at least one view type to represent each piece of data we want to display. Like I said, with my particular items, I have right now a name of an item, and I have whether or not the item is urgent. So all I'll need is actually 2 text views. If you're just displaying the name, you'll probably only need a single text view. So why don't you go ahead and try to implement your layout yourself, and in a few seconds I'll show you what I've come up with. Alright, and this is kind of what I've come up with. So it looks a little like this. We just have the item name on the left hand side and the item urgency on the right hand side. So I created just a couple of text views to represent this. Again, this is within a constraint layout. So I just constrained rather than the top to the bottom off or bottom to the top off or anything, it was just right to the left of this item and then the left of this item to the right of this guy here. I also added just a couple of string resources to represent these kind of placeholder texts. And I've just specified the text attributes here, gravity, and other than that, it's pretty much just constraints and heights and widths. So once again, this is what it looks like. If you want to have a completely different view, totally fine with me. If you just want to have a basic text view, in fact, you don't even need this whole constraint layout. I'll show you the support for just a text view if you don't want to have multiple items. And again, just make sure you're providing an ID for each of these guys. And that's pretty much all of the actual coding we want to do here. So unlike with our main activity, where we kind of connected the items that we need through these variables and then the methods here, we're not going to do quite the same thing for this guy. Instead, what we'll do is we'll use layout inflators. So what a layout inflator does, it essentially takes some kind of a layout. In this case, it's going to be the entire layout file constraint layout, and it's going to kind of blow it up so that we can access the elements and the attributes just like we would in main activity. So it's not quite doing the same thing as this technically, but it's doing a very, very similar thing. Rather than setting the overall page's view to display this entire page, it's setting a very small part of the page to display that particular layout file. So I guess before we launch into the actual recycler view adapter implementation, which we'll do in the next section, I'll just kind of walk through the process a little bit. So the way in which these recycler views work is there's typically what's called a view holder, and there is what's called an adapter. So the view holder is a way to represent the entire view of the recycler view. So that means the recycler view itself, as well as each of the individual items within the recycler view. We can use this to specify items in kind of a top-down list way, or we can specify items in kind of a grid format. So that's why recycler view is, well, one of the reasons why it's so great is because it's very flexible in how we can display items, whereas list view had much more limited functionality. As for the binding of the data through the use of these adapters, essentially we'll pass in some kind of an array list or something like this, and it will take all of that data and it's going to populate each of the fields that we specify. In our case, well, in my case at least, it's going to populate this text view and this text view through the use of some kind of binding functions. So we'll essentially use a layout inflator to inflate this layout. We'll gain access to this text view and this text view. Then we'll take in the data, typically the item name and the urgency, and then we'll bind those two pieces of information to their corresponding text view and then create a view and add it to the overall list view. So I know that might seem a little confusing to you guys. Like I said, I'm not expecting you to know how to do any of this yourselves, as it is very confusing even to seasoned app developers if they've never worked with recycle or list views before. Now all of that stuff, however, I'd rather save for the next section as it is a little heavy, and I'd rather not have a super long section again. So once again, just kind of customize the way you want each of your individual list items to look. Do that in some kind of a layout file. Do make sure that the height of each of your items is specified, the root height, okay? As if you just say match parent or something here, then each item is going to take up basically a whole screen's worth of space. All right, once you're ready to do that, we'll move on and let's build up our custom adapter.